And joining us now in our London studio is media consultant and commentator Paul Connew. He's a former editor of the Sunday Mirror and has worked as a deputy editor of the News of the World and the Daily Mirror. Paul Connew, thanks for being there.
Pleasure.
As we've heard, police investigating the News of the World phone hacking have now broadened their inquiries to look at invasions of privacy by other newspapers who are using a different private investigator. The evidence for this goes back to 2006. What can you tell us about it?
In fact, further than that, in fact, the Operation Motorman was an investigation carried out starting in 2003 in conjunction with the police and the Information Commissioner's Office, and that they uncovered this network of, if you like, blagging and other practices by Steve Whittemore, who had a network of operatives, some civil servants, some mainly police civilian officers, and this led to the conviction of Steve Whittemore, who worked for the News of the World and many other, as you've said, many other organisations. He was convicted along with another operator called John Boyle, who also worked for the News of the World and some others too. That was in 2005. They were convicted. They only got to the 2-year conditional discharge, though, which obviously some people might find remarkably lenient. And then the following year, 2006, the Information Commissioner issued a report called What Price Privacy, and which went to Parliament, but then seemed to sort of rather get lost. And I think it's been acknowledged now by David Cameron, Ed Miliband and Nick Clegg that perhaps the previous Labour governments rather didn't react to this one, and neither did the Tory opposition. It rather got sort of sidelined, is a polite way of putting it.
We're not talking, just to get this straight, we're not talking here about phone hacking, are we?
No, Whittemore didn't appear to be phone hacking. What he was doing was, and some of it is perfectly legal, some of it's not legal, and exactly who was doing what among the myriad of documents taken away is unclear. But it involved sometimes phoning up, impersonating people to get hold of bank records. It sometimes involved paying officials in the vehicle licensing office, for example, to actually get hold of car registration numbers. Also, civil servants who had access to people's social security records and thus their addresses and other confidential information. Also, it involved people in British Telecom and elsewhere to actually get hold of unlisted telephone numbers, etc. There's a myriad of operations going on.
Indeed.
And in fact, the 2006
in fact,
report...
Well, yes, indeed. Whittemore had a network of, you said this before, corrupt officials who supplied the information. He had a system of charges in place as well. For example, a policeman supplying ex-directory phone numbers would get £40, and then Whittemore would sell this information onto newspapers at £70 each. So there's a whole system in place for paying here, and vast numbers of journalists and at least 32 newspapers that we know of were taking advantage of this regularly.
Yes, I mean, the Daily Mail headed the list. The News of the World, I think, was actually 5th, and the Observer, sister papers of the Guardian, which of course has been at the forefront of the investigation into phone hacking, the Observer had used it 103 times. The Sunday Times, you know, Murdoch's paper, had only used it 4 on that occasion, and I don't think the Guardian actually, to their credit, figured at all. But its sister paper, the Observer, figured 103 times.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because we're now looking at this in a brand new context, the context in which all forms of corruption, high-level corruption, as with the phone hacking, and lower-level corruption involving corrupt officials, police and so on, is being looked at in the same inquiry. Could there be criminal charges stemming out of this as well as the phone hacking inquiry?
There could well be, although I suspect the inclusion of the Motorman report and dossier will probably, in the end, prove rather more significant in the context of the judge-led, the Lord Leveson investigation, the parliamentary investigation, which of course will have people, under oath and has wide power too, well, very wide power indeed.
One of the differences in this case is that Whittemore apparently destroyed a lot of his documentation, which separates him from Glenn Mulcair, the News of the World private investigator who kept his, and the investigation is now relying on that documentation.
That's absolutely right. In fact, what the police seized, from Whittemore was basically the records of what he was doing and what he was charging, but not the minutiae. So it didn't have quite the same, paper trail, as it were, of who actually commissioned what exactly, and individual names of executives, which of course, for whatever reason, Mr. Mulcair seems to have been, massively. Massively detailed in what is retained, and that's what's coming back to haunt a lot of people.
Well, indeed, and on the subject of Glenn Mulcair, now that Rupert Murdoch has pulled the plug on paying his legal fees, finally pulled the plug after that parliamentary inquiry, you suspect there'll be a bidding war to get the big tell-all interview from Glenn Mulcair?
I think it'd be very unethical. I can't see that. I think the bigger danger is that Mr. Mulcair possibly tries to do a deal with the police investigation to tell all he knows, and especially as he's facing a massive amount of civil actions, which would have to fund himself to defend, and so therefore, this could be Pandora's box opening. And if Mulcair sings like the proverbial canary, it will actually probably could make the police investigation much shorter in time and save the taxpayer, possibly hundreds of thousands of pounds.
The final question, since we were talking earlier about the other private investigator used by the other newspapers, Steve Whittemore. He could be in the same position, couldn't he? Because although his documentation is gone, one presumes the judge will see him cross-examined under oath, and he might have the same effect in a way, but bringing in a whole range of other journalists and newspapers.
Yes, I don't see Whittemore facing another criminal prosecution because he's already been dealt with. But yes, he will, I'm sure, be called as a witness under oath at that judge-led inquiry. Also, of course, Rebecca Brooks referred to Steve Whittemore in her evidence at the Select Committee on Tuesday because she used him to reverse trace an extraterritorial phone number, but defended it on the grounds that it was part of the investigation that she had made a personal crusade into paedophiles. So she acknowledged using him, but sounded a public interest defence. And I think we've got to be very careful here, in fairness, that we don't have a totally anti-press witch hunt here, which leads to such draconian new legislation. It makes genuine investigative journalism almost impossible.
Paul Connew, a lot to talk about. The ramifications here in Australia. We'll be talking more about this later in the program. Hopefully we get a chance to come back to you as these investigations unfold. Thanks for being there.
I'm happy to return whenever you want me. Thank you.